Hello. Uh, Hi everybody. I hope everyone who's watching this is in good health and staying safe out there. Um, for those of you who don't know me, just in case anyone who doesn't is watching this, my name is Nichols. I am an autistic actor and writer, and for the past let's say several years, because I can't remember the exact amount, I have uh, gone into public venues or events or what have you and talked about my own experiences on the spectrum, tried to help dispel myths and things like that, and, just tried to help provide is best information that I can. Um, and seeing as how everything's closed down, rightfully so, right now, I thought I'd try this year. So we're gonna see how well this goes. This is very informal, as you could probably tell. Just going to be kind of talking off the cuff here. Um, so I hope you all bear with me with that. Um, Before I talk about some of the other things that I want to get to, I better give a primer about myself, a little bit of history for those who either don't know or just those who would like a reminder. So here's some history about me. I was first diagnosed when I was a much younger version of myself, without knowing exactly when. As my mother put it, there were just certain things that my parents noticed, and they kind of started looking into things back in the 90s, when I was a kid. And one of the things that stands out to me is like when I was being diagnosed, I think it might have been under pervasive developmental disorder or something along those lines, which eventually turned into an Asperger's diagnosis. And of course, now everything is under ASD, or just like a general autism diagnosis. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The thing that I remember is that my mom told me that the person who diagnosed me like was scratching that off of my record because they did not want me to be diagnosed with that, because they were afraid of what the label would have on me, the impact it would have. And it's so interesting that that's the case, and it still, in many ways, holds relevance now. Um, in many ways, the understanding of autism, of people on the spectrum, and all the different kind of areas of neurodiversity, as it's called, it has come a long way, but in so many ways, it still has a long way to go. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this video. So for the longest time, there weren't many organizations that were widely recognized in terms of like autism support or charities or things like that. They certainly existed, but nowhere near as big or as influential, for lack of a better word, as the organization known as Autism Speaks. Now, Autism Speaks is by far the biggest, most well-known autism organization on the planet. I think that's probably safe to say. Now, that is honestly a bit of a problem, and many of you who might not be familiar with certain things in the autism world, or may just have like more of a passing knowledge of it all, might be wondering like, why is that a bad thing? Well, it is fairly dubious that the largest autism organization on the planet is Autism Speaks because of the things that they have done throughout their history, and even some stuff that they still do as recently as this year. And I just kind of wanted to bring some light to that. Now, none of this info is new. If you look back, my guess is as long as the organization has been relevant, there have been articles or neurodiversity rights groups, autistic support groups, or things like that, that have expressed concerns and criticisms on Autism Speaks. One of many of them is that they have had language in their presentations, their campaigns, that has not been very inclusive towards people on the spectrum, focusing very much more on people around the individuals who are autistic, or not providing a lot of support for people on the spectrum themselves, or even, whether intentionally or not, giving the autistic community a bad image. For example, they've used language like calling autism a disease. They have compared it to AIDS, leukemia, I believe, other bad things, suggesting that, there's a mourning process involved when you find that your child is diagnosed with autism, as if your child is dying, which, if you didn't know, autism is not an illness, or it's not a disease. It doesn't kill you. It doesn't harm you. The only harm that really comes from autism is the fact that it exists in a world where society at large does not provide enough support for people with it, or that there's a lack of understanding of those individuals with it. And really, I think it's a lack of understanding that causes a lot of hostility and a lot of fear surrounding the subject of autism, because people often hate or fear what they don't understand. And part of the reason why I talk about things like this is that it's my hope that maybe, even if it's by some minute detail, that I can help just a little bit. And I'm not here to shame anyone who has supported Autism Speaks or similar practices like that in the past. Um, Full honesty, like before now, even in some of my previous presentations, I have, I've done things that kind of went along with the image of Autism Speaks because I just did not know any better. Um, Things like, Light It Up Blue, which is something that Autism Speaks uh, created. It's not something that just the general autism community was behind. That's something specifically that their organization created. To my knowledge, because blue is often associated with um, male. At least that's how I think the idea is. And they wanted everyone to light it up blue because more men are on the spectrum than women, which even even if that's true, which the numbers seem to support it, I guess, but like that really kind of leaves out a huge portion of autistic people. And there are a lot of autistic women that don't get enough recognition or enough support, even compared to the small amount of support that even men on the spectrum get. Um, and then the idea of the puzzle piece, which I have also used before in the past, uh, existing as something like a symbol that's supposed to represent autistic people as a whole, as like something needs to be figured out about it, or like there's a piece missing, which is not true. Autistic people aren't missing anything. We're not like a puzzle that needs to be solved or something that just doesn't fit in anywhere else. We are whole on our own. And that puzzle piece has led to a lot of kind of ideas of like something having to be inherently wrong or missing from an autistic person to make them autistic. Um, so in more recent times where I've talked or done presentations, I've tried my best to not do those things. And I hope anyone listening to this who might have partaken in such things before would perhaps reconsider doing that in the future as well. Now, I, I'm also I also want to make clear that um, Autism Speaks isn't like 100% evil or anything like that. There's always, or at least usually, more complexities to thoughts than that. For example, recently they have Autism Speaks has updated their logo. It's still a puzzle piece, but at least now there's a gradient where there's some pink and blue in it. So now that men and women are both represented, which from another article that I read was something that the neurodiversity group has done like decades before even Autism Speaks existed. And yet they were given no credit for any of that. And even then, that still leads to the fact that the puzzle piece still exists, or the fact that, especially with identity being a big important thing that's become more and more in the public eye as of recently, that there's only like two colors representing it, and then that's going to be a whole other thing that doesn't fully get represented on. But that's a discussion for another time, and for someone who's a lot more expertised in that, I guess you could say. Another thing that I wanted to bring up that has also rather unfortunately been associated with autism, uh, at least since the 90s, I believe, is the dubious connection between autism and vaccines. Now, if the current state of the world wouldn't change your opinion on the importance of being vaccinated or having access to medications about specific diseases, because you can clearly see what happens when something isn't protected against, with the current crisis going on, then I don't know what will. As I was saying, back in the 90s, there was this study that was published by this one person whose name I will not mention here because they don't deserve to be mentioned, where they linked vaccinations or some part of vaccinations to autism in developing children. Now, and I hate the fact that I have to still say this, that study was proven to be false. That person lost their license, and many other studies have been done with much larger sample sizes, which have all come to the same conclusion that there is no evidence that autism is linked to vaccinations. Is that clear? Now, let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say somehow it was. It's not, but let's entertain a hypothetical thing that it was. Like maybe 1 in every 1,000 people vaccinated got autism somehow. That their brain was completely rewired and somehow like some kind of science fiction happened. Let's say that. Even if that were true, would that really be the worst thing? So many things and people are afraid of like catching autism or their children getting it. And it's like they describe it as something like, oh, it's worse than death. Because it's like, well, would you rather your kid not grow old at all and suffer from some other horrible illness or thing that actually can hurt or kill them? Now, listen, I understand that there's a lot of parental fears about everything. And you know, that makes sense. You love your kids. You want them to be healthy and safe, and you want the best for them. But them being autistic shouldn't make you more afraid than them developing polio or some other horrible actual illness. I'm an autistic person. There are millions of us. And the fact that some people think that people like me, regardless of like where we lie on the spectrum, would be a worse fate than like just dying, that really hurts. And I urge anyone that even thinks that or thought that for a second to reconsider what that thought means and the connotations of that on me and everyone else on the spectrum. I want to end this on a not negative note, because like I try to be a positive person. in as many areas of my life that I can. I want to spread goodness more than I spread negative whatever. So I'll say this. If you are an autistic person, whether you're a kid that happens to be listening to this or a grown adult or whatever, you deserve to exist. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to be supported. And you deserve to have your voice heard, whether you speak verbally or not. And I hope that as time continues to move forward, that there will be more and more opportunities for you and all of us to be able to do that. We have things to offer the world just like any other person does. And if nothing else, know that I'm here and I'm willing to help as best as I can. Let's do our best out there. This is Nicholas Eveland, autistic actor and writer, signing off.